Welcome, Sebastiano Cossia Castiglioni, to the Vegan Champion Podcast. What an honor. How are you today, Sebastiano?
Hello, Jason. It's great to be here. I'm honored to be on your podcast, and I admire what you have done and what you do, and especially your focus on the animals, which is very important.
I want to give people context on who you are, and I really want to let people kind of understand some of what you've done, because you're a very, very interesting person. You're probably one of the most interesting people that I follow on social media right now, I would say. I find that you are able to offer some incredible perspective for everybody who is interested in, as you say, helping the animals. So can we go back and give people a bit of context on who you are, some of the things you've done? Let's break it down. First, where were you born? Can you tell us a little bit about, your upbringing and where you come from?
I'm Italian. I was born in Milan, northern Italy, and born and raised there. And I would say that the key moment for what I do now and where I am now came when I was 15, and I received some literature in literally walking in the street about animal experimentation. I went home, read that, read more, overnight became a vegetarian, and immediately an animal rights activist, which I still am now. So
At age
I
15.
age 15, yes, that just changed my life and informed everything I've done ever since. Um, I became very active in organizations against animal experimentation, against hunting, and later on in others. And I started reading all the important books, Tom Regan, Peter Singer, this and that, everything available. And we're talking about the 1980s, so it was not that easy. No internet, no digital publications. So you really had to go and look for the information. And
What do you think it was? Are you just that kind of person that you're easily, like, you saw? I'm curious as to what do you remember about specifically, like, what was on that, whatever you were handed on that day?
I think it's what we in this movement, at least the people who do it for the animals, have in common. You cannot be indifferent to the suffering, and empathy is immediate. You cannot think that it's justifiable what is done to animals, and so you immediately want to do something to remedy that.
Right.
And the most natural thing for a young person is to be an activist and go out and yell and scream and
And so this is what
distribute
you did in the
flyers.
in the 80s? This is what you did in
Oh,
the 80s?
yes, that and much more, which I'm not going to say. But
Okay, fair enough.
I remember I was in anti-hunting actions, some of which were collecting illegal traps, and others where we were confronting hunters, and some of my friends got shot. I didn't, luckily, but Italy has
Wow.
very bad hunting community. They're poachers and illegal hunters of all kinds, very violent people. So
Let's
you need,
let's let's talk about this, because I mean, I don't want to derail from your story, but while we're on the topic, we should mention there's probably a lot of people who've seen the Game Changers movie. Damien Mander has a part in that movie that a lot of people find really inspiring. He's an anti-poaching
yeah,
activist who is also a vegan. He's doing great work in Africa, in Zimbabwe, I believe. I have that right.
yeah, absolutely. He's
Zimbabwe, and I think rumor has it there's a documentary coming out about the
you
uh,
bet.
the
There's a
Asha.
phenomenal documentary coming up by National Geographic,
It's the
and
Asha Shinga. Is that right?
Akashinga, yes,
Akashinga.
yeah, and the brave ones. It's refers to the women he trains and that are the most courageous rangers in the world. And
Yeah.
Damien Mender is a very good friend, and I'm actually on the advisory board of the International Anti-Poaching Foundation, and he's fantastic because what he's doing is not only defending animals and wildlife and doing active conservation, but empowering women in Africa at the same time.
Hmm.
And I sometimes joke with him, but the only way to really empower women is to give them guns, and he's done that. So it's fantastic.
Oh man, yeah, he is he's such a guy. I think that you can point people who may be like, I don't know, people who are hunters, people who are, they want to jump out of helicopters, they want to, that kind of like
Yeah.
he's very relatable to a certain, I think, kind of person out there. So
He's,
it's interesting.
he's a hero and a courageous person. Let's not forget that hunters are violent people who are complete cowards. They shoot harmless animals, and they shoot baby deer. It's despicable. They're the most cowardly human beings on the planet. And Damien is the universal opposite. He stands between the poachers and the animals at the risk of his life, doing a phenomenal job. I would like to remind everyone who's listening that uh, the International Anti-Poaching Foundation needs our support. And in some of the projects they lead, for the first time on the planet, there's been a rise in the number of rhinos as opposed to the usual decline. So their work is so effective that actually the population of rhinos could recover.
So
It's incredible.
how can people support this like initiative? Because you said people need their support. So
Go to the website and donate as much as you can. Money
right.
is very important because the project is expensive. They look after enormous areas of land, and it's all supported by donations. And so that is really key.
And maybe if people don't have money to donate, you can definitely, I think people underestimate the power of sharing stuff on social media, if
Oh,
they just spread the
that's
word
very
about what they're
important.
doing.
But you can also volunteer and go there and help. So
Oh,
I
can
encourage
you?
people who want to help
That's
to
cool.
do that. Yeah.
That's very cool. That's very cool. Yeah, so I'm sorry, I didn't mean to distract from your story there. I was just fascinated by, so it's you go vegan at age 15, you've gotten this leaflet that has
Vegetarian first, because again, uh, not unlike today, there were no videos explaining everything, and the dairy industry, what's wrong with milk? Who
right.
knows if you don't see it and you don't know. But
So
but after
vegetarian, but you wanted to get active in animal rights. You wanted
oh,
to
I
get
did a lot, and I worked in several organizations, and then I was trying to combine my professional activities in different fields with my ethical standpoint, and it was not always easy because there was no real way to invest in vegan things. It was nothing. There weren't even restaurants that were vegan, so um, what I did was the first time that I applied the vegan philosophy into my work was at the winery that I own in Tuscany, where we were the very first, I believe, to go completely vegan,
and
which
what's the
means
name again? How do we say it?
Querciabella. Querciabella.
Querciabella.
Yeah, which means beautiful oak tree.
Oh,
Um,
wow. I like that.
Yeah, so in wine fining, the operation where you remove residues of grape skins and seeds and so forth from the wine, most of the time it's done with animal-based products. So it's done with egg white and and in worst cases ox blood. If you can imagine that, I mean, who's so deranged to imagine to use that? Or fish bladder. It's disgusting. So I couldn't imagine using any of those. So we started using clay and seaweed-based products before they were allowed, but I didn't care. And now they're mainstream. Of course they're fine because they're perfect. But um,
So when was that you started doing that?
well, this was in the 90s,
Okay.
and
Okay. I see. I didn't realize. I knew that you had your wine thing, the company, and that you guys are veganic growing, and like that's definitely something that I want to like go into detail about because I have some questions about that. I want to know more about it, and I'm sure lots of people do. I'm sure lots of people didn't even realize that wine isn't vegan. What? Why isn't wine vegan? Right?
and beer, same problem. But
So this was a way. So this was a way that you saw to do something with a business that would be in the realm of
yes,
progressing
so
animal rights. The message.
We became, at the winery, we became organic in 1988 and biodynamic in 2000. The problem with normal biodynamic is that all the preparations and the treatments and this and that are based on cow manure, which I didn't want to use. So we invented our own system and created green manure, so-called. So, compost that is obviously made of plants. And we created our entire system without the use of animals. Because something that a lot of people forget, a wine is non-vegan, not only because of the products they use to do the fining, to clarify the grape juice, but also in the vineyard. There are people who use manure and other animal products. There are people who exploit animals in the field instead of tractors. There's this fashion that drives me insane of people pretending that they're doing something natural because they use horses instead of tractors. And it's just horrifying. So it's important to clarify, wine is truly vegan if there are no animals in the vineyards, no animals in the cellar. Otherwise, it isn't.
So this opens up the question to, I mean, it's not just wine, it's how all food is grown, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's one interesting piece of information that we need to keep in mind. It's one of the million reasons why we have the positions we have. The so-called pork industry, the industry that kills and slaughters poor pigs, the waste from these gigantic industrial pig farms is so huge that there is no solution to store it or dispose of it. So what they used to do is just throw it in rivers, dig big holes and fill them, and pollute everywhere. And now what they do is they force farmers who provide them with feed or farmers who provide them with pigs to take the manure back and dispose of it. And of course, no one knows what to do with it because it's so much that the quantities are so immense that there's no way to dispose of this in any way that makes ecological sense. So when we oppose this horrifying industry, it's for many reasons. But some, when you really want to look at an example of something that is completely unsustainable, it is raising pigs for meat. It doesn't make sense in any possible way. And of course, it's damaging in many other ways. Something I want to bring up that people may be interested in hearing these days, if, we're all living under lockdown or different conditions of isolation, seeing widespread misery in terms of economic suffering and also, of course, human suffering, health problems, and deaths. This all comes because people eat animals. The first cluster of this virus it's not clear if it originated there, but it certainly was spread. The first cluster was in the so-called wet market, which is a market like there are all over the world, including New York City and Milan and every city in the world, a market where live animals are slaughtered in front of the people who buy them because it's considered, like a fresher product because of that. So some of the reasons why we oppose this horrifying industry is that, of course, keeping animals in horrifying conditions, in small cages, in confined places, in quantities and crowds that don't make sense. Of course, it makes them ill and makes us ill as well. What the so-called pork industry is trying to hide right now, and Smithfield in South Dakota, the largest cluster of COVID in the US, inside one factory killing pigs. What they're trying to hide right now is the possibility that COVID is actually transmitted to and by pigs, which could be a reason why the cluster at Smithfield was so large and was so deadly. Of course, they don't want us to talk about that, but SARS was transmitted by pigs. So there's a very good possibility that COVID is also transmitted, not only by live animals living all together and coming in contact with humans, but also through the meat that people buy, which, as we know, is unhygienic anyway, but it could also have this side effect, slight side effect of carrying COVID.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, I mean, we can't really, you can't escape COVID in conversations these days. I mean, it's obviously taken over, the whole sort of everything on the planet. It's affecting everybody in various ways, and to me, and it's like just mind blowing how little attention is given to the root cause of where this came from and what can, and I think we would agree should be done. And maybe we could get into that. I mean, it's so interesting, and I don't want to again, I don't want to I do want to make sure that we do justice to your story, and like where I want to map out your progression here a bit, and maybe we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves, but but I think so just to backtrack, you've got this vineyard that you have, you've been producing wine veganically since the 90s, and you were
Yeah.
basically sort of are you on the, what do you consider yourself to be a pioneer in that sense? I mean, how many other people were doing doing veganic gardening in the 90s?
That's if you want, that's the leading the leading theme of what I do. I'm always a pioneer. I always do things in advance. And as I said, we turned organic in 1988. It was not fashionable. It was not easy. And biodynamic in 2000, when nobody even knew what the word meant. And doing it in a vegan way, which of course most people don't even understand now the reasons why.
Mm-hmm.
But it's obviously the only sustainable way to do agriculture, where you don't exploit and don't use animals, which are completely unnecessary in agriculture.
So on that point, I just want to, because there was an episode of the Rich Roll podcast.
Mhm.
I should remember their names, but they are farmers who do, I believe it's like biodynamic farming. And their argument is that they can't basically understand, like there's a whole movie about it. Oh my God, I'm totally blanking on this now. And I knew I wanted to bring this up, but the whole premise is like, we just can't see how it could be done. Like, some of these biodynamic farmers apparently are saying that, like, well, we just can't imagine, because that's where, I don't know if you remember I don't know if you listen to Rich Roll.
Let's spend 5 seconds thinking about it. Instead of cow manure, we use green manure, which is manure produced from plants. Solved.
Yeah.
I think, if they can think about that, I'm really worried about them.
Well, that's sort of what I wanted to hear, because when they were on Rich Roll, I wanted him to say, like, press on that point. Like, look, are we including animals because they need to be included and we need to exploit them, or are we trying to justify because we want to eat whatever?
Of course you don't need animals and animal products for this. It doesn't make any sense. Biodynamics is a system, for those who don't know it, where you're trying to recreate a small ecosystem and put all the elements in balance. And the goal is to make your soil alive again. It's quite interesting to see the difference between conventional soil that takes chemical products, pesticides, herbicides, and this and that. It turns into sand, desertification, and soil erosion. It's dry soil that doesn't have any nutritional value, any life in it. Everything's dead. In biodynamics, your soil is completely alive. You can see it. There's life in it. There are insects, microorganisms, worms, and animals swarming all around. We have varieties of insects and birds and other animals that roam around. But the soil in particular is soft and airy. And you can, in certain seasons, you can stick your arm into the soil. It's that soft. And so to obtain that level, there are several techniques that are used. Among the cover crops, which means you plant a variety of different strategic plants in the middle of the vineyards to fertilize the soil and to add substances that otherwise wouldn't be there. So classically, you grow legumes and then cut them and mix them in the soil to add nitrogen and so forth. But of course, it can be done without animals. There's no reason why animals should be part of the equation. And if anything, what we have is a lot of wild animals that live in the forest next to vineyards and sometimes visit the vineyards themselves, from wild boars to deer to all sorts of birds and rabbits and this and that. And they may fertilize the soil just by walking by. So be it. That's fantastic. But you really don't need it. And our wines are winning award after award. They have very high scores. They're critically acclaimed all around the world. You can make fantastic wines without animals, I can assure you.
I've never really been much of a wine drinker, I must admit, but my parents definitely enjoy wine. And I think, I haven't actually I haven't really drank any alcohol in the last decade, basically.
Oh.
But I would tell you what, I would definitely have a glass of your wine, just because I'd feel like I have to.
You know that one of our most trusted and historical importers is actually in Toronto.
Oh,
And
I'm getting my hands on a bottle as soon as this interview is over.
wines have been in Canada since the 1980s. So it's
Oh wow, wonderful. Well, I'm gonna be spreading the word more about your wines, because I think it's so fascinating, and I think it's so interesting. Like, why is it that you chose wine? I wanted to get to, like, what is it that what
well
chose you to
that
take?
actually it was my father who started the winery in the 1970s, and it was not his main activity as it is not mine. But he became ill in the 90s and asked me to take over, so I did, and
Nice.
made it bigger, and let's say, uh, just worked on every aspect to make it a global success, and it's worked. It's
That's really
a great
cool.
operation.
I think it's a great example of just showing people how they can. That was your situation. You had a father who had, the winery, and you had that connection, and it was you could see a way to do sort of, I don't know, put your spin on, animal rights, getting
Absolutely.
that message out there, doing whatever. Cause like, there's so many different things people could do. Right.
Yeah, this applies in general to everything. And, if I'm sure you have a young audience, and whenever you're approaching a business situation, try to think out of the box, and try to apply new rules that don't exist, and try to invent new ways of doing things, because everything can be rethought, everything.
Mhm.
And there are better ways to do everything. To begin with, start reimagining business by being compassionate and generous and and empathetic with other people. So, for instance, in our companies in here in Europe, we actually, I started in the 90s as well. We have a rule by which, if any one of our employees becomes pregnant, she has the right to decide how long she's going to stay home with full pay, and no one can discuss it. And you would not believe the fantastic atmosphere that this creates, because people know that they can take care of their children for as long as needed, but they also feel a great responsibility about coming back to work. And it's a system based on trust, as opposed to exploitation. And the more you give, the more you receive. And in general, there's no better way to create a better world than to give as much as you can to others in so many ways. So being
That's profound.
respectful of people and their space and their time and their family affections and so forth is a great way to be compassionate, not only to animals, but towards animals, but also towards humans.
Hmm. Yeah. Wow. That's you. I gotta say, you just kind of blew my mind there. Just like the different ways that we can, think about dealing with, like, managing employees, for example. If you're starting up a business. Yeah. Wow. I had not
Yeah,
thought about that.
there's the usual model where you squeeze people and torture them. And I'm always shocked when I think about the US, where people have 1 week of holidays a year or 2 weeks, And of course, it's totally unhealthy and insane and counterproductive. But we're used to thinking in such a terrible way. Look at what's happening right now. People are getting fired because there's COVID, and they're losing their health insurance because there's no system of support, and then they're losing their home, and it's absolutely absurd. The world needs to be rethought with everybody's interest in mind, including animals, of course,
So
because the more there's an interesting philosophical representation of this. We all now have learned to think through different dimensions. So let's think of our ethical sphere, and let's think of how we can expand it. And one dimension for sure is time. We used to think about the now, but now all of us think about future generations. Every action you take has consequences of future generations. So we have expanded our vision and our ethical sphere in that dimension. The other one is geographical. We used to think, well, everything's fine where I am. Who cares? Now we think about the consequences of what we do on the other parts of the world. The third fundamental dimension on which we need to expand our ethical sphere is to include other species. And then our ethical sphere starts to really look like a sphere, and to include as many as possible. And it makes sense.
that's fascinating. That's fair. That's an interesting idea as well. I mean, wow. So if we think about the different things that, I mean, you've done so many different things. Like you said, the wine is not even the main part of what you do. So let's I mean, tell us more about, so I'm so curious, because I mean, when I look at your your LinkedIn profile or whatever, and I see the different stuff, you're involved in so many different things, and it's all super like fascinating to me. And I want to understand, like, take me through the journey that you've gone through over the years, from, say, that first point you became an animal rights activist. You've done so much up until now, and you still continue to do so many different things.
There's one fundamental reason, which I don't know how positive it is, but I get bored if I do only one thing. So I do if possible.
There you go.
And so throughout my life, I've worked in many fields. I've worked for I even worked for the Italian government at some point. I was an advisor to the prime minister from 2014 to 2016. But what I did was initially worked in design, and it was a different way to apply this desire to change the world and change how things are and make it my own way. And so I worked in editorial design and then industrial design, which I still do. I designed all of my furniture, and I design objects as well. I design
Cool.
tableware, dishes, all sorts of objects that. But that's another way to apply creativity. But I went on to I started working in finance, in not as an investment banker that kind of structure things, but doing investments on my own. So investing my own money in creative ways, looking at problems in a way that others had not, and generating wealth that way, while at the same time trying to do the right thing. So never investing in things that would go against my principles. And then at some point, this was in 2012, I met Chris Kerr. I don't know if you've ever interviewed Chris Kerr of New Crop Capital, but
I haven't.
he's a phenomenal person, and his wife, Kirsty Golson, she inspired him to become a vegan and to look at the world from a different perspective. And he was the chief investment officer for the Humane Society of the United States. He was the first one to say, hey, you have money to invest it in things that do good for the animals. And it was the first time that it was done. And so he opened this entire universe to me. And at the end of that year, I invested in Beyond Meat. That was the first investment in the plant-based space. And from then on, it's been many, many more. I'm currently an investor in almost 50 companies just in the plant-based space, and it's very exciting. It's the world is changing, and the plant-based space and plant-based food space are really changing the shape of the entire supply chain and how people eat and how they produce their food. So my path was, thanks to Chris and Kirsty, I finally found a way to merge my main ethical interests with my strongest professional endeavors, and there I became a vegan investor.
I'm so fascinated by all of this. I'm just so fascinated by your approach, and so I've got let's get into the weeds on some issues here, because I have some questions that I'm just dying to ask you.
Please.
One of the first things that I would love to clarify, because I'm sure that you know a lot more about this than probably a lot of people, but I could be wrong. But I would guess that you've got a few things to say about subsidies and animal agriculture, because it's something that I wish I understood a lot better. And I don't know what it looks like around the world, how different it looks in different countries, but the degree to which
it's horrible all over the world. Here it is in a few words. The governments all over the planet give subsidies in agriculture. And the idea, the original good idea is, let's support farmers because they produce food for all of us. And if they're having a hard time financially, then we're not going to have food. So let's do that. Problem is, politics are completely corrupt everywhere. And so what happens is there are lobbies from the biggest industries. They corrupt the politicians, and then the subsidies go to the wrong industries and the wrong people. So in Europe, this is mind blowing. So pay attention to this. 20% of the European Union budget, not agricultural budget, the entire budget of the European Union, 20% goes into subsidies to the meat and dairy industry. So the meat and dairy industry could not exist if not for subsidies. So let's not forget, on one side, they get taxpayers' money for some unknown reason, an industry that is unsustainable, creates waste, creates pollution, creates greenhouse gases, breeds antibiotic-resistant bacteria, produces tons of waste that nobody knows how to dispose of, and then its products make people sick. So they go to the hospital, and again, the taxpayer pays the bill for their health that has been ruined. So for some absurd reason, these industries think that they deserve public money, and they take all of it. But the other thing is, and this happens in the US as well, agricultural subsidies go to the largest corporations, not to the small farmers. There isn't the little farmer with his, whatever, few acres of this and that, and he gets a subsidy because he's doing a good job. The largest conglomerates of agriculture take all the money. And again, in particular in the animal industry, because it's the same situation in the US, without subsidies, this industry would not survive. It is financially impossible. It is financially unsustainable. Meat, if it had to really incorporate the costs of all the damage it does to the environment that it does not pay for, and all the damage it does to people's health, and all the damage it causes to society in general, the price of meat or milk would be so high, it would be unaffordable, which it is. The planet cannot afford this kind of destruction. But there's an economic and financial side to this, which is none of these companies would be viable. They would not survive 1 week without public subsidies.
So is it fair to say then that, this is essentially the Achilles heel of a huge percentage of the animal exploitation that's going on the planet, right? Is like, if we were to, I've heard you speak before about, we don't necessarily have the ability to just say, okay, tomorrow or ending all subsidies, or do we have that ability? Like how, like when we're thinking about making a shift.
We don't. There's a very simple reason. Corruption is much more powerful than public interest. So there's no good reason on the planet why these companies should get subsidies, except they have phenomenally strong and powerful lobbies that pay politicians to send money their way. So how do you change that? You either reform the lobbying system completely and abolish it. But again, in Europe, we don't have official corruption like the U.S. does. In the U.S., corruption is
Official corruption.
called lobbying. You go there, put money in the hands of a politician, and tell them to vote whatever you want, and it's legal. It's mind-boggling. But in Europe, where we don't have that, you're not allowed to put money directly into the hands of a politician. Guess what? They get money anyway, and they still vote for the big corporations and to protect them and to do their interests. So it's very difficult until something like COVID happens and there's less money around, and the governments have to decide how to use it. Unfortunately, so far, what we've seen, for instance, in the US is immediate bailouts to the airlines, to the oil industry, and to the meat and dairy industry. Again, obviously, the result of corruption. But hopefully, people who are now put in such a difficult situation with their personal finances will say, "Hey, why are my taxes going to these horrible corporations or to the banks or to all the people who do evil things?" and who run industry that cannot support themselves.
Yeah, I mean, like, do you see a possibility here for this situation to, with COVID, to kind of highlight just how ridiculous it is, the amount of taxpayers' money that's going to these industries? Like, can we highlight that fact and try to use this as a situation where we can say, like, look, we need to, like, really, or like, because I'm just imagining here, like, yeah, the lobbyists are powerful and they're all over the planet, but like, do you see a way that we'd be able to, I don't know, through awareness or whatever, get people to just be so against it that it just can't go forward? Or
my pessimistic side says that no, because their power is so huge that they can distort information to levels that we can't. I don't know if you saw, just 2 days ago, a study was published about the fact that if you don't eat meat, you get depressed.
I wanted to ask you about that. I'm so glad you brought it up.
But it's fantastic. And you read the footnotes and you see that the study is sponsored by the Cattlemen's Association, whatever it's called. I think it's the National Cattlemen's Association. So the beef industry pays for a fake scientific study that says that if you don't eat meat, you get depressed. It's depressing to see how stupid they are.
Man, it is.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So, but they still got it in all the newspapers and all the magazines, and everybody's repeating the stupidity without checking where it comes from.
And that's journalism, apparently.
That's journalism for you, yes. Talk about corruption. But here's what I suggest that we all do. Now, we are already kind of annoying to the rest of the world, so we have to do this in a very gentle way. But
okay.
I would suggest to everyone to make an effort now and for weeks and months. Every time you have a chance, remind everybody where this thing came from. Because as you were saying before, everybody's talking about the cure, the vaccine, the lockdown, the this and that, and nobody's talking about the cause. Mm-hmm. In a vegan world, COVID-19 would not have existed, would not exist. And the same thing can be said of all the previous epidemics and contagions, like SARS and MERS and all the other ones. But especially what we want to bring attention to is the fact that the next pandemic is brewing in the factory farms, where antibiotic-resistant bacteria are being bred every day. There's a fantastic article that appeared in Scientific American. Picture this, okay? These scientists who are studying antibiotic-resistant bacteria, they follow a truck loaded with live chickens that are going to slaughter. And they were able to collect samples of antibiotic resistant bacteria. So bacteria that if they attack you, you're going to die. There's no cure. Okay. They're inside their car, following this truck, and through the air vents of their car, some of these bacteria came through and they were able to collect them inside their own car. This is the level of danger. Now imagine that the same bacteria are on the meat inside the factory. So the same article in Scientific American talks about the fact that they collected samples of antibiotic resistant bacteria inside the nostrils of workers in the pork industry and the slaughterhouses in general. So that is where the next pandemic is going to come from. So all of us, we need to make an effort to remind everybody, at the cost of being annoying as usual, where this thing came from. It came from the fact that people eat animals and people raise animals for food and other reasons, which doesn't make any sense, and it's very dangerous. And the next pandemic will be worse, because let us remind everyone, the virus is a virus, but we're seeing, the how deadly this is. This big discussion about the percentage of mortality, blah blah blah. But at the end of the day, it's relatively small. A bacterial infection for which there's no antibiotic cure kills 100% of the people who get it. Okay, so if that were to happen, we would all get sick. Everyone who got sick would die. So it would be massive and enormous. And it wouldn't come from a wet market in China. It comes and it's bred in all the Western industrial farms.
So is it fair to say, I'm not an expert in this field at all, but I'm just wondering if I'm understanding correctly, that all of these antibiotics that we have now, right? We have antibiotics that are, it's amazing, because if we do get a bacterial infection, we have something that is, able to defend against it. And basically we are taking for granted, I guess you could say, the defense that we have with antibiotics. And I guess a lot of people, we don't really realize how lucky we are that we have antibiotics, and that if these infections happen, we have a defense against them. And so maybe, what's been going on in terms of allowing factory farms to exist, or even allowing animal agriculture at all to exist, we're not really fully grasping, what's at risk here, and what kind of a future we could be looking at. And people will just kind of laugh it off and say, oh, we'll never stop eating meat. But as I understand it, a lot of governments and, around the world, people who know the science and who know the real risks that are posed here by these kinds of, viruses, bacterial infections, a lot of people are really scared about this. And there's a lot of, organizations.
Well, I tell you what, the United Nations and the World Health Organization have published a report a few years ago highlighting the very big risk that these antibiotic resistant bacteria pose, and they come from factory farms. Imagine this mind-boggling number. More than 50% of all antibiotics used in the US, but the same thing as in Europe, are used on animals. And the reason why they use them is they administer these antibiotics to animals on a regular daily basis, almost daily basis, or anyway, on a massive basis in a prophylactic way, which means to prevent disease, because they know that they keep them in such conditions of overcrowding and filth and suffering and everything else, that unless they give them antibiotics before they get sick, they will all die, just because of the crowding and the horrible conditions in which they live. So over half of all antibiotics administered in the Western world are given to animals. And what this means is that these antibiotics, and the strongest ones, by the way, become ineffective because bacteria develop a resistance. And so we're brewing these horrible, deadly, impossible to defeat bacteria inside the factory farms. And it has happened already. It has happened already that these bacteria have gotten out. when you hear of someone who goes to the hospital and they have a disease, a bacterial infection that cannot be cured with normal antibiotics or very strong antibiotics, that's where it came from. They probably
Right.
were exposed, either they worked there or they knew someone who worked there, or they were exposed through the products, through meat, to these bacteria. So, we need to keep this in mind, and we need to remind everyone who eats meat that their food choices expose the planet to global pandemics like the one we are all going through. Let's not miss the chance to tell everyone, hey, this is because people eat animals. This is the reason why we're in such a situation. And the next one will be worse.
So you are, I think, right. I'm completely in agreement with you that we should be using this as an opportunity. People might hate us, as they usually do, or get offended or whatever, but it really is sorry, I hit my mic there. It really is it is an important thing to be talking about, because people are talking about it already. So why not like add something valuable to the conversation, right? Add
Absolutely.
something valuable that's going to push us forward. So that's super interesting. I am also curious your thoughts, because I guess that's sort of how we could say that's a good takeaway that people can take from this episode, is that everybody listening or watching, please, rewatch this again if you want to, or, do further research if you want to understand this better. Maybe, do you have any reason if people wanted to like really dig into, some scientific research, like could we point people in a direction?
Just Google United Nations antibiotic resistance, and you'll find the report, the
Okay.
WHO or World Health Organization antibiotic resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also a fantastic organization for those who want more information called FAIR, FAIRR, which is an initiative of the Jeremy Collar Foundation. And you easily find them online, FAIRR, FAIR. And they have done the most extensive research on all the risks involved in animal farming, including the deepest studies, and to the point that they depicted the current pandemic, and predicted that it might happen. But all of this is well documented, and you can access the documents.
Well, this is great. I think I don't want to take too much of your time today. I want to start bringing things to a close. I think we've given people, it's super fascinating just to hear your story and your background, all the things that you've done, and with the wine and with the investing and all of that. And also, I think that last sort of point there that we made about the importance of bringing up where COVID came from, and bringing this into the discussion and getting people thinking about it can help to shift the way that people think about the food system. I would love to, before I let you go, sorry, did you want to?
No, I wanted to add a couple of things, if you don't mind.
Sure, yeah.
We depicted a very dire image of the current situation, but I would also like to bring something positive to the discussion, which is there is so much innovation in the world of food that can really change the world. So we all know Beyond Meat, and we all know Impossible Foods and some other of these, but there are so many new interesting companies creating new products that are fantastic for the planet and fantastic for people's health. And so it's not all black. We can make choices as consumers. With our dollars, we influence the way the world goes. So when we go to the store and we buy a new plant-based product, we're supporting a new system of creating food that does not damage the planet and doesn't hurt the animals, which is very important. So there is light at the end of the tunnel, especially if we all shift and try to move. And I would advise, all of us vegans, as we were joking before, we're always annoying, but we have to try and be very kind and gentle and understanding, especially with people who are transitioning or considering even, eating vegan once a week. Why not? Let's support them and encourage them, as opposed to demonizing them because they're not 100% vegan. And the other thing that I wanted to say is I would encourage everyone who is not already involved to get involved into activism. Because let's not forget that we know as much as we know not because nowadays information travels, so we have access to information. We know what we know about the animal industry, animal farming, because there are heroes going there and working undercover in secrecy to get these images and this information for us, because that industry does not want to show you anything. They want to hide it. They want to put a label. Now there's a certification called, I believe it's animal welfare or something like that. I mean, another fake label they invented by which an animal who's been tortured and slaughtered and killed supposedly lived happily, and it doesn't make any sense. So I would like to encourage everyone to support the animal rights organizations, because they're doing a phenomenal, fundamental job for all of us by exposing the horrors of this industry, or by welcoming animals who are rescued from terrible situations. So if you have time, look him up. Animal Outlook, which used to be called Compassion Over Killing, and then Animal Equality. Of course, I suppose you know Mercy for Animals. Farm Sanctuary is phenomenal, and I've been on the board of Sea Shepherd for many years. Fantastic organization protecting the oceans. And we were talking before about the International Anti-Poaching Foundation, Damien Mander. But I would really strongly suggest, oh, and one of my favorite, by the way, I don't know if you're familiar with Project Coyote.
I'm not.
It's an organization based in California that, if I can open a small parenthesis here, because it's interesting to hear the madness of people. I don't know if you've ever heard what a killing contest is. Have you heard of that?
I mean,
So
I
there's
can imagine.
this barbaric thing, which happens in Canada as well, by the way, and in several states in the United States. There are competitions where hunters are free to kill whatever they want, whatever wild animals they want, and the winner is the one who brings the biggest pile of dead animals. So the winner is declared by volume of dead bodies or by weight of dead bodies. And Project Coyote is a fantastic organization based in California that has spearheaded the effort to abolish killing contests, and has already prevailed in 6 states in the US to have them banned. But they need our support, of course. So it's whenever we think of what we can do as vegans to make this a better world, supporting one of these organizations is fundamental. It's number one thing that we should think about every day.
Yeah, I wonder. That's yeah. I definitely want to give a bit of a prospect for people, as what can they do, what can they, how they can be more effective. So I really appreciate all those things there, and I like this is I can just tell that you are a person who you really genuinely want to see this change happen in the world. You really, really want to see it, and you really, really are putting the pedal to the metal in terms of making it happen. And the way, like, just the suggestions that you fired off, and just the, what you just said there is just, it's super, it's powerful, potent stuff that people can do. And I think it's interesting that, there's debate. There's people who will say that we should, people who actually, they only want to say, I'm only vegan for my health, right? I'm not vegan for the animal rights reasons, right? And then there's other people who will say, oh, really the food system is the biggest cause of, animal exploitation. So we should really just be focusing on food, and we shouldn't be talking about maybe hunting or other things, because, it's really just the food system. So, I mean, my thoughts on it are sort of, I have my own thoughts. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. But I mean, to me, it's sort of like, it's all part of a conversation that needs to happen, right? All these different ways that animals are being exploited. Like, I know you had a vegan shoe company. You were doing like vegan, shoe, like, there's all this other stuff. So, I mean, how do you feel? Is it that, like, we just need to be doing everything, or should we be focusing on advocating on one thing in particular?
Here's my thought. I'm in this for the animals, first and foremost. I cannot tolerate the idea that sentient beings, wonderful sentient beings, are being tortured and killed in horrific ways every day for absolutely no good reason. So that enrages me, and that is the number one reason why I do what I do, on top of everything else. But it so happens that everything, as we know, is interconnected. So guess what? What's good for the animals is also good for the planet. There's no question that walking away from animal agriculture would immediately improve the life status of the planet in terms of how land is used, in terms of deforestation, in terms of greenhouse gases, and this and that. Then it also improves human health. There's no question anymore. Anyone denying this is a hypocrite or a liar, that a vegan diet is the best for your health and that eating animal products damages your health. So it shortens your life. It makes it worse. It makes you sick. So why would anybody want that? And again, it makes sense. And then there are all other sorts of considerations, including, I would like to bring this to the table for anyone who's not interested in anything else, but think of the conditions in which the workers of the meat industry are being forced to operate in the past few weeks, forced to work in places while they were sick and while others were sick, so they got sick as well. The count now, the head count of people who got infected inside meat plants is above 6,000 people. And the number of people who died, I think, is 25 so far. But mind you that, of course, they're mudding the numbers and the data because, you know, maybe you got it at the factory, but you died at home. We didn't know you were sick. But imagine how horrible an industry that is based on the idea that there's zero care for the animals and zero care for the humans who work there because someone needs to have meat or cheese on their plate. It doesn't make any sense. So, but back to your question, I'm in this absolutely for the animals, but guess what? Everything else makes sense as well. It's all in the same direction. However you look at this, it makes sense for the planet, for people, for the animals, for the environment, for the future. And it's so whichever way people arrive to this, I celebrate that they get there, be it just for their health or be it because it's the best way to be a performance athlete as you demonstrate. But you know, just get there any way you like, and we'll welcome you with open arms.
Yeah, and I think for so many people, they come one way or another, and then eventually they find the that sort of ethical side of things, and they do make that connection. Like I know a lot of people who they came in for the environment or health, but then, you know, one day they see a certain picture or a video, and it's like, man, yeah, this is wrong what we're doing to the animals, you know.
I don't think there are very few human beings we can call human beings in the world who would look at one of the videos that we know of what happens inside factory farms and be indifferent. Of course it touches you, and most people don't want to see it. They don't want to know. But once you know, whatever reason brought you there, once you see the images, they're stuck in your mind. You can't get rid of them ever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
something else we need to spread as much as possible.
I have one more quick question that I'd like your thoughts on, and then I know I'll let you go, and I want to you know, be respectful of your time. The one thing that I sort of struggle with is conceptualizing, like, let's call it like a post animal egg world, because I think when we talk about environmental you know, considerations around animal agriculture, obviously there are a ton of negative impacts on the environment and on wild ecosystems and, you know, the oceans and all of it, right? So I can see the benefits of moving to plant-based agriculture for many reasons. I wonder though about wildlife, like wild animals. You know, watch, you know, Tiger King. I don't know if you watch that series. You know, all these, like, you've heard of it, I'm sure, you know, but you know,
I actively refuse to watch it.
I watched it just because I figured I just want to know what everybody's talking about and I can relate to people. But it was yeah. Anyway, but the question that I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on. You know, if we're able to reduce, I think, the total amount of land that we're using for animal agriculture, right? Because we would need so much less land. This is something that a lot of people don't understand this, but we would need way less land to feed our population off of plant foods. It just doesn't take as much space, doesn't take as much resources. That's great. How can we think about moving forward and say, like, in my head, I would love to believe that Damian Mander and his crew can come along and just like make room for all of the wildlife and just bring back all of the endangered species, and like, oh, wouldn't that be wonderful? But like, in my head, I'm like, how is that all going to go down? Like, can that happen? Like, what do you think about when you think about the future and what it could look like?
Well, we can think we can look at this in a positive way and think that younger generations, as they have already demonstrated, care about the planet and its future, so are going to direct their choices, their consumer choices, but also the political choices in a better direction. So to put numbers to what you were saying, 70% of global agricultural land is used for animals, whether it's pastures or whether it's used to grow feed for animals, 70%, which means that you could easily concentrate agriculture to support the entire planet in a much more efficient way in less than half of the land, the agricultural land you need now. Probably even less, because you can be more innovative. And some other time we'll talk about vertical agriculture and
Yes.
indoor growing of this and that, which is great because the environmental impact is much lower. So let's envision a world where more than half of the agricultural land is reclaimed and it's rewilded. So it's given back to the environment, which of course would bring back more wildlife and would create a more balanced environment, balance the greenhouse gas situation, better the climate, and make everyone's lives better. So that is doable. That is absolutely at hand. Not only is it possible, it's inevitable. I want to give you another number to blow your mind that I heard
Yeah.
from Richard Brubaker, this phenomenal researcher on China. So despite everything, this is before COVID, okay? But despite everything, consumption of what they call pork, which is pieces of poor dead pigs, consumption of pork in China keeps increasing, okay? So at this rhythm, by 2050, if consumption of pig meat in China progress this way, and it continues to increase this way, if we turn the entire planet Earth into raising pigs, it would not be enough. So
Wow.
there are objective reasons why this food system doesn't work. It is impossible. It is totally unsustainable, totally illogical, irrational, and wasteful. So what we need to think of is not only a different system is what we would want, but we cannot do otherwise. We cannot even survive if we don't change it. So I would say that this is a positive thought to keep in mind. Not only is it, we should all wish that this happens, but it is indispensable. It is inevitable. The change will come, and it will come at some point at higher speed than anyone envisioned, because this is how these changes happen. It's not going to be a slow trickle movement. At some point, it's going to turn around, and maybe this is the time when it's going to happen.
Yeah, it could be. I could talk about this stuff all day. I could talk about it all day, and it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, Sebastiano. I hope you might come back sometime.
I would love to, and it's been a great pleasure. And I'm available anytime, whenever you want to talk about these things.
Well, let's do it again. I mean, there's a lot more. I mean, I'd love to talk more about the food, because I think a lot of what's happening on sort of the cutting edge of food innovation, whether that's plant-based, meat alternatives, or whether it's
have you heard of air protein?
I have not. What's that?
A new technology that turns CO2 into proteins that you can use as ingredients to produce air-grown meat.
Is that precise fermentation? Is that the same thing, or is it different?
That's a different thing.
Different thing.
So, well, it's a form of precise fermentation, but no, actually, this is different because precise fermentation uses bacteria. This is, let's say, an even more advanced technology. But imagine you take air and turn it into food, and
Wow.
it's magic. So, and
Wow.
there are companies working on this, so it can happen. It will happen. It does happen, and so there's so much to do and discover. Can I say one last thing? I'm sorry.
Absolutely. Please.
I guess you already said this to everyone, but can everyone please uh, buy something and support their local vegan store, local vegan restaurant, local vegan takeout, and do it very actively because they all need our help if we want to see them at the end, at the other side of this horrible thing. So please keep in mind everyone who needs our support, the animal rights organizations, but also all the vegan businesses that do a fantastic job at making us happy. And hopefully they're going to be there once this thing is over.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm always so grateful anytime anytime there's vegan food available. If there's a restaurant that is 100% vegan, I always gravitate towards those restaurants, preferably. I mean, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do, but when the option's there, I mean, it's great to support those fully vegan businesses that are really showing how it should be done. That's what I'd like to see everywhere. You see the vegan chicken nuggets coming out at KFC or whatever, but it's like, okay, that's good, but like I want all of KFC, vegan everything, and then I'll be happy.
It will happen. It will happen. This is a good subject for our next meeting, but the chicken industry is soon going to be totally turned upside down. So we'll see
Let's
what.
let's do it again soon. And so something for everybody to look forward to. If you guys have any further questions for Sebastiano, be sure to let me know, and then we can go deeper into some of this stuff on another episode of the Vegan Champion Podcast. Thank you once again, Sebastiano, for coming on. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you so much.